details there. I believe Justin included a link to those materials. They're also on our website. I figured I would at least start with the budget packages, and that would be a shorter conversation. And really, I think the big piece that you all will be interested in is the legislative concept. I do want to recognize, though, that in terms of the budget packages, we do know that there's likely going to be budget shortfalls, so for the 2021 biennium. However, at this point in time, we'd started budget package development pre-COVID and prior to really the economic challenges that Oregonians in the state are facing. And so we still have these packages here, in part also because we've been directed by, or at least the Secretary of State's audit in 2016 said that we really should be communicating our gaps and shortfalls and really the agency needs to the legislature. So we do know that there is a lot of questions around the viability of packages moving forward. However, we do think these are all important packages, and you'll see we have a fairly long list actually, because we do think that the work that is being done across the state and locally is really important. And so we want to at least keep those conversations moving forward. So, or at least make the legislature and the governor's office aware of those potential opportunities. So with that, if you look at attachment 2 of the commission staff reports, which has the list of the packages, the ones that I really just wanted to note for you, if you look at the staff report, you can kind of see our prioritization and principles there for that prioritization. But really what I did want to note for this group is there's package number 7 on there, which is protecting groundwater supplies. And that one includes 3 positions to review well log reports and follow up on deficiencies and inspections. And then $100,000, which is a small amount, we know, but would be an amount to at least get a program started to fund the permanent abandonment, repair, or replacement of wells to address construction deficiencies that can lead to groundwater level declines or serve as a conduit for contamination, as well as repair or replacement of wells for water for human consumption for low-income households or in areas of declining groundwater levels where other sources of water are not feasible. So that one's really one that's focused on well construction and well construction deficiencies. The $100,000 for the funding program is tied to our legislative concept more directly than the other ones. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well on the legislative concepts. And moving into the next package that I would just highlight for all of you, 10 is the groundwater basin studies package. This one includes resources to do evapotranspiration study, as well as groundwater basin or a basin recharge study for the whole state, and then also to prepare other basins for study. And really, Justin's the expert on that package if there's further questions around those. And then finally, the other one that I would note is the Harney one, number 13. This one is the Harney CREP Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, and establishing one within the Harney Basin to conserve groundwater. So those are the ones that have really direct ties to groundwater issues. Of course, really many of these packages have groundwater ties, but in the interest of time, I'll just see if there's any questions on those at the end of our presentation here. And I won't get into the details of each one of those. So I'll turn your attention then to the legislative concepts, which is attachment 1. The Water Resources Department has 5 legislative concepts. I'm only going to talk about 2 of those today, but again, feel free to ask questions about any of them. The first one I'll draw your attention to in brief is the water right transactions fee schedule. And this one is a fee schedule that we bring forth to the legislature essentially every 4 years. And it is to essentially increase fees to address the increased costs of doing business. And generally in recent years, we have done that by taking the cost amount increases that the Department of Administrative Services provides for the 4-year period and increasing the fees by that amount. So that one is one that we talk about every 4 years. As a result of that, we are anticipating shortfalls within that section. So that one, I think, will be some, there will be additional conversations around that. I bring that one up because, of course, groundwater rates are part of that fee schedule in terms of applications and transfers and other transactions and services provided by the department. So the next one that I'll draw your attention to is the well construction one. It's on page 3 of attachment 1. And really, this one has been one that we've long been in the process, I think, of talking about. Back in 2018, we had begun some conversations about the need to modernize our well construction program. Internally, we talked about it. We had some conversations with the Oregon Groundwater Association. There are, in the 2016 Secretary of State's audit, there is some recommendations in there about improving the well construction program. And the 2017 Integrated Water Resources Strategy, there is also some recommended actions related to improving the well construction program. So really, this is something that we've been thinking about for a while and didn't have the resources necessarily to begin to address it during the 2019 session, since we were focused on dam safety at that point in time. I'll note that this legislative concept, the department, our approach really is to have a lot of engagement with stakeholders. And so we will be holding a work group meeting with stakeholders in July, and we're in the process of scheduling that. If anyone is interested in participating in that, just shoot me an email, and I will include you in the information and materials and scheduling of those work group meetings to discuss these. So this really is, I think, the first, the beginning point for discussions, and I anticipate that this concept will change over time and be refined over time. I tend to find that we can often improve legislation and make it more practical for everyone involved when we have more engagement and input, because people see different things in it and think of things differently. So, which helps us make a better concept. In terms of what the goals are for this is really, you all may be familiar with the well construction program, but we're only able to inspect today about 30% of the wells that are newly constructed wells in the state. And we've historically never had resources to inspect all wells in the state. So from that standpoint, we know that there's wells out there that have not been inspected and that continue to have well construction deficiencies. And so Justin, yeah, you can just stay on this page. Thank you for pulling that up. So, you know, in terms of the goals for this legislative concept, is we really do want to, we know that there's going to be challenges in the coming biennia with resources. We want to be able to maximize our limited resources. And part of that is improving our ability to plan our inspection workloads. Currently, we don't have much ability to do that for various reasons. In part, you know, we don't receive start cards necessarily in a manner that allows us to plan workloads. We don't have them expire. So there's a number of start cards that are still out there. We don't have information on when a seal may be placed for us to be able to do an inspection at that point in time when it's most valuable. So there's a lot of different things that we could do to help us improve that. And then in addition, we want to be able to increase our efficiency in processing start cards and well logs. We currently have about 85% that are submitted electronically. And and there's about 15% that are not. And so we'd like to see those be submitted electronically in the future, as well as receiving GPS locations for new wells and well construction, which we've found to be very helpful, particularly when we're doing groundwater studies or trying to inspect those wells and being able to accurately locate them. We also want to make sure that well drillers have the proper training and understanding of best practices to proactively prevent well construction deficiencies. And I'll talk about some of the current programs that we have and then additional provisions that we'd like to see. And then we also want to, and we've heard quite a bit about this in recent years, there was legislation in 2019 brought by the Oregon Groundwater Association, where the well drillers have concerns about unlimited liability from the standpoint of they're essentially liable for as long as they're licensed for any well construction deficiencies. And so we have a proposal that we're considering that will balance the need. Our concerns have been that there is a need for us to balance and protect well owners and the resource with balancing that with driller concerns about liability. And then also, finally, there is, our goal is to also establish a funding source to help address legacy well construction issues. And this relates to that $100,000 that I mentioned in the budget package. Where doing so will protect groundwater resources for those that rely on them. So I'll give you a little bit more details. You can see, really you can read the bullets in more depth here, but in order to achieve those goals, some of the provisions that we are considering include requiring new applicants for a well driller's license to provide evidence of welding ability. That one would allow us to make sure that they're able to properly weld the casings. In addition, requiring a constructor to place a seal on at least 2 wells per biennium in the presence of a well or a well inspector or a representative from the Water Resources Department in order to renew a license. In addition, in terms of well driller experience, our continuing education program is set to sunset in 2022. And so this would extend the sunset on the continuing education program to 2030. It would allow the department to charge less than currently in the statute, which is $40 for continuing education credit for department sponsored courses, which would give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of offering courses where we've identified a real benefit to well drillers and being able to ensure that they're properly constructing wells. And then also, this was based on some feedback that we received from some stakeholders in regards to the membership of the Continuing Education Committee, which reviews the continuing education credits, and essentially to include a member who has expertise in groundwater quality, public health, or employee safety. And that was out of an observation that currently the committee has 3 members from the drilling community and 1 member from the regulatory community. So this proposal would make it 2 from the well drilling community, 1 from the regulatory community, and then 1 who has expertise in groundwater quality, public health, or employee safety, which could be from the regulatory community or could be someone that represents one of those public interests. In addition, the proposal includes a requirement that start cards must be submitted at least 72 hours before beginning work on a well and no earlier than 60 days before beginning work. So one of the current challenges, and this goes around being able to plan our inspection workloads, is that start cards can be submitted a year before, and there's no time limits, right? And so we don't actually know when the work is going to begin based on when the start cards are submitted. They can also be submitted day of. And so obviously that doesn't help us be able to plan our workloads. Within that start cards, the driller would need to provide the approximate timeframes for beginning construction and seal placement and then completion of construction. And if for some reason, because we do want to be flexible, if the seal placement ends up being different than that time frame, they would need to provide at least 4 hours prior to seal placement notice to the department if it's different than what is on the start card. And then start cards, if work does not begin, they would expire within 60 days. And so this is really to try to help us, again, be able to plan our workloads and understand what wells are being drilled within the state. In addition, we have in here, as I noted, in terms of efficiency and processing start cards and well logs, we would, starting July of 2021 or 2024, require electronic submission of all start cards and well logs, as well as the inclusion of GPS coordinates on all well logs. And so this is really geared at trying to maximize our staff resources, and currently doing manual entry of start cards and well logs can take up a lot of staff time to do that. And really, we'd like to move towards what we see as more of having those submitted electronically. We do want to give people, though, some time to adjust, and so that's why it's set to 2024. And then the GPS coordinates are just vital. We find a lot of errors with locations, and this will help our staff as well when they're doing groundwater studies, for example, be able to really find those wells, as well as the well inspectors. And then finally, well, there's two more provisions. We also have in here a proposal to address the liability, but really recognizing that the agency has limited resources. And so within this, we've established essentially a tiered liability system where, for example, if there is a higher review by the agency, the liability would be shorter for the driller. And then essentially, if we had not inspected the well or reviewed the well log or received video of the well, the liability would be longer, but there would be a cap on it of 15 years. So that is kind of the spectrum there. So if we had done a well inspection during seal placement and reviewed the well log, that would be on the shorter end of the scale of 3 years. And then there's interim steps in between there in terms of maybe not as stringent of a review, but that would lead to shorter liability periods. And then if the agency had not had the opportunity to do anything on it, it would be 15 years, which is shorter than today's current standard, again, which is unlimited liability for the period of the license. So that's how we tried to balance, one, protecting landowners, balancing the limited agency resources, but also recognizing the concerns of the drilling community of being liable for well deficiencies. And then finally, the last one is the one that I've mentioned a couple times here, which is establishing water well abandonment repair and replacement revolving fund. And this really, we started having conversations about this several years ago, in part because of you all may be familiar with the Mosier program, where we had received funding from the legislature to repair and replace wells out there to address well construction deficiencies, which really had impacts on the groundwater resource and people that were relying on that resource. And we've heard similar kind of concerns around the state regarding domestic well users and those that need it for human consumption and that may have a need to repair or replace their wells. So there's other provisions in here, such as being able to repair or replace a well for human consumption for low-income households, and then in areas of declining groundwater levels where other sources of water are not feasible. So there's a lot in there, and like I said, this is the beginning. I'm sure there's going to be changes to it, and we're looking forward to having conversations about how to make this legislative concept work and make sure that we're being responsible to the public and to our charge to protect the resource, and as well as to the drilling community to make sure that they're able to do their work as well and provide water to those that need it. So I'm going to stop there. That was a lot, and see if there are any questions.
I think I saw Trent had his hand up at one point.
Yeah, I did have a question, and that was just the length of time for the liability for the well driller on the well. But you answered that, and you were saying that you're looking at a 15-year, basically a liability term for the well driller after the well has been installed and the seal has been placed. Chair Maston and member, yes, that is correct. And when I say 15-year liability, that's the maximum. That's if the agency does not have the opportunity to inspect the well or to review the well log. It would be shorter. So 3 years, for example, if the department was able to observe seal placement and reviewed the well log, and we determined that it appeared that the work had been properly completed. So it's kind of a sliding scale based on to what extent we've been able to review the information. And that's in part, we know that there's an interest from at least some members of the drilling community of having a shorter period of liability in the 3-year range. At the same time, we also know that we have not, we've never had resources to inspect all wells in the state. And so this has been really the only way to address well construction deficiencies is if we find it 20 years later, is to have the driller, if they're still licensed, fix the issue. And so I think what we're really trying to do is recognize trends around having liability for 20 years, and at the same time recognize that we have these well deficiencies potentially out there, and that particularly in the current economy, that it's going to be a challenge to get resources. And so we're trying to bring a middle ground. And so that's why we've had this sliding scale. If the agency's been able to review it, it would be shorter period of time and longer period of time if there's been no review. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a pretty decent compromise too. So thanks. That's outstanding.
Thank you.
So are there any other questions?
I'd just make a comment, Ken, to Raquel. Speaking on behalf of the Oregon Groundwater Association, we're really looking forward to the conversations of improving the well construction rules. And from my perspective, also the Groundwater Association, but probably more than anything of getting a review of all the well logs. And that in itself, I think, will improve the well construction tremendously. So I'm excited about that one.
My only comment would be, I believe 10 actually probably started in this committee, Justin, and worked forward. So it's been something that I've been trying to get traction on for multiple years. So I'm glad it ended up in a policy option package. And secondly, I'd be willing to answer any questions on number 13 also.
I just want to second Mark's comment regarding 10. When I saw that, I thought that was pretty neat. And I had the same thought of the committee sort of came to fruition. So thank you for that, Justin.
Yes, well, I thank you for all of your comments. Certainly, the budget packages, both the one that focuses on well construction and the well log review, we would love to see. We rank that one, pretty highly in part because we know this is an outstanding issue that needs to be addressed. We also have included really the groundwater package number 10 because it's an important issue, and as well as the Harney package because it really is an important issue locally. So it was really hard to try to narrow down our budget packages. So we still have quite a bit there because really this work is important. So I do appreciate the work that this committee has done to provide input to help us be able to identify where we should try to focus resources. I want to thank the Oregon Groundwater Association for the well log review input and really heightening the profile of that issue. And then of course, Mark, for heightening the profile of the basin studies and recharge, so as well as this committee. So yes, there's a lot more work to be done. I wish we were coming in with a better economy and budget environment, so we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the Harney Basin groundwater update.
Okay, thanks, Raquel. Let's see here. I'm going to give a preview here of the PowerPoint that I'm intending to provide to the commission, just to make sure that it goes smoothly with you folks, and to make sure that what I show is what I intend to show. So I'm assuming now everybody can see just the slide. Thumbs, yeah. All right, good. Okay, so this is a real brief update to the commission at their meeting tomorrow. And the goal is to start to provide some background ahead of anticipated rulemaking for the Harney Basin in 2021. So a couple of items is that, you know, we've been working on a groundwater study for a number of years. As I've reported to this group and the commission and others before, we've been working on the data analysis since about late 2018, and we've had preliminary results coming in that are being put into the draft report that's currently in the peer review process. That being said, some of the preliminary findings have shown that the rate and magnitude of groundwater level declines in some area of the basins is worse than we expected, and we believe that reduction in groundwater use is going to be needed to achieve reasonably stable water levels. So what that means is discussion of critical groundwater area and or voluntary agreements. And as Ivan mentioned earlier, likely a parallel path starting in 2021. So real quick, and I think that folks are well aware by this point, I've shown this slide enough times of where we're talking about. So we've got outline in red here of the hydrologic Harney Basin surface water boundaries. We've got an outline in blue here of the greater Harney Valley, which is basically the lowlands where most of the groundwater development is occurring. Dots are our monitoring network and the various frequencies at which we monitor. For geographic reference, we've got Burns here and Highway 20 coming through. So this is the area that we're talking about in general. Again, just want to make sure that we always touch on the background that in 2015, our initial assessments indicated that we were pumping more water than was being recharged to the groundwater system, and therefore we were taking stored water, and that caused declining water levels. We changed the basin program rules, or the commission did, in 2016, which among other things initiated the groundwater study. And again, that study is currently undergoing the peer review process and publication we're still planning on near the end of 2020. So in the future, after the report is published, the current rules give us a 1-year period to initiate a rules advisory committee. We're going to initiate that relatively quickly after the report is published. And again, kind of in addition to the rules saying we would do it anyway, the rules actually say that we'll explore whether changes are needed. I think, again, with the preliminary results, it's pretty good evidence that certainly in some parts of the basin, we're going to need additional controls. And so, again, we've mentioned that at several venues in the basin, and want to make sure that the commission is clear on that that's our intention going forward. That being said, in this particular meeting, I just wanted to touch on 3 things that we've been doing kind of in the background. We've talked a lot about the basin study. We've talked a lot about the place-based planning with the commission and therefore with this group. We haven't talked a lot about just our general core functions and what we've been doing in the basin with respect to communication, with respect to the water rights processing, and with respect to allocation and enforcement. So again, the staff report gave a lot more details on what we've done in each of these areas. I just want to touch on, throwing up there as a reminder, the sub-bullets on this slide are all, again, detailed in the commission report. But one of our goals is we want to try and provide as much information as possible about expected future changes to groundwater management in the basin so that groundwater users out there can make the most informed decisions that are possible, understanding that there's still a good deal of uncertainty between here and rule changes, a lot of public input and thinking to be done. Also want to make sure that folks are aware that water right transactions continue. So even though the change in the basin rules put a lot of limits on new groundwater permits, we've had about 6, I think, approved since the new rules were in place in 2016. But that being said, there's been a lot more activity on extensions of time. That's existing permits that have a completion date that folks would like to extend out. Claims of beneficial use for people that have been fully built out their permitted water use system. And then a lot of transfers in the basin. A lot of folks moving water rights around, and that's to be expected when the ability to apply for new permits is limited. So we've been doing a couple of things. First of all, we have prioritized all the claims of beneficial use in the Harney Basin to try and get those all processed. So we've had a claim of beneficial use backlog for a number of years, and we've focused our energy on the Harney for the past year or so to try and get all those claims that have been sitting, waiting review, pushed through the review process and certificates issued. With respect to the extensions of time, we have been processing those according to our best available information. And as this study has provided more information that, again, in some parts of the basin, we're over allocated on the groundwater section, we've been choosing not to provide extensions of time, or I should say choosing to. In our assessment process, the assessment criteria have come out for a negative finding on extensions of time. So that's been one of the main topics of this communication about our press releases and direct letters to permit holders to make sure that they're aware that extensions of time to develop more land are probably unlikely, and that, if they're contemplating building out between now and their completion date, that may or may not be a real sound investment. So again, our goal is to have the most accurate picture of water rights. We want to have all these extensions, claims, transfers processed so that we know what the world of water rights is out there. And secondly, to make sure that we're communicating that as best as we can folks in the basin. And then lastly, we've been working, the field services group has been working on distribution and enforcement of groundwater rights. So over the past couple of years, we've regulated off some unauthorized groundwater uses, folks that were irrigating without a proper water right. We've been enforcing on some permit conditions, minimum well construction standards, and lastly, investigating well interference complaints. So our general goal with that is that focus is to make sure that the existing groundwater use in the basin is all legally entitled by a valid water right, so that again, when we look forward to rulemaking that might change how we manage water in the basin, that we know that the baseline is as solid as possible and we know what's going on. So again, trying to make the commission aware, make you folks on GWAC aware that preliminary findings are worse than expected in some areas, that we believe a reduction in groundwater use is needed in those areas. We're planning to give a more detailed summary of the study results later this year as the report nears publication or is published. And we expect to be discussing basin program rules with this group and the commission in 2021. So that's what I've got, and I'm happy to answer folks' questions on that, what we've been up to, what the future may hold.
So Justin, on one of your slides, it said we had an outreach meeting in October of 2019 and one in March of 2020 with question and answer. The March one was scheduled. I don't believe it ever occurred because of COVID-19. We might want to take it off, and it's rescheduled for, I believe, September, October of this year.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Didn't the meeting that we had in the basement of the courthouse is the one that I was alluding to? I believe that was early March or
maybe February, I believe. I could be wrong. If that's the one you're alluding to, we need to look at it could have been in March, but let's look at the date on that one again.
Okay.
I thought it was more of the public out. So that to me was a continuation of the last groundwater study advisory committee meeting. It wasn't actually a public outreach meeting. We did have some collaborative members join that, but we had a full-blown public outreach meeting scheduled for March, I believe, that was canceled. So maybe I'm confusing the two, Justin.
Yeah, and maybe I need to be more descriptive. So thank you.
So my last comment, I'll just say it at this meeting. Probably everybody in this committee knows how fully vested I've been in this process for multiple years. I've become a legislator now, so I will be busy probably for the first 165 days of next year. I have a real desire to be in that RAC, involved in those meetings. And I know in the 512 basin rules, it allows us 1 year after the groundwater study is published in order to convene that RAC. I would hope there'd be some consideration to letting the legislative session end before that RAC starts. And I know it's not all about me, but I think I could be instrumental there, Justin. So.
Yep. Nope. That's I've taken a note, and that's certainly worth discussing. So we'll do that. All right.
I'll just give one more overview. Some of the preliminary findings that we're finding, if we look at the water balance or water budget, currently there's about 230 to 240,000 acre feet in draft that comes into the basin and recharge. I believe that number. I haven't looked at it for a while, but the current groundwater consumptive use is about 230, 240,000 acre feet. So it's not good in that basin. So we talk about water budgets a lot of times as a checkbook. So water coming in, water going out. We're definitely depleting our checkbook now from our savings. We found that some of that savings is 3,000 to 10,000 years old. But the thing that I will encourage as we move forward is, yes, we are in a negative trend, but let's not panic. We need time to work ourselves out of this. I feel that I'm going to try to lead volunteer agreements. So even in the worst areas in the basin, maybe we've used 15 to 20% of that checkbook that's there. As we continue to draw down that checkbook, there does come some domestic and ecological concerns, but we're going to need time to continue to draw that down to where we can hit a reasonable, stable groundwater level. And in my simple mind, even if we have to get to 40 to 50% of that checkbook before we can hit reasonably stable, that allows my community to work through those issues socially, economically, and ecologically. If we panic and try to shut that off and hit reasonably stable at the current rate of that checkbook, it will not be beneficial for my community at all. So it's something we're going to wrestle with. I'm thinking the agriculture community gets together, comes up with a plan, something potentially like a 3% reduction a year for 10 years. And what is the desired outcome? So maybe the desired outcome with that 30% reduction is to slow that rate of decline in half. If we don't hit that goal, we possibly have to reduce more. If we hit that goal, we come back together and see, are we at reasonably stable or not? And maybe we have to repeat. So maybe this process in some of those areas take 10, 20, 30 years. But in that process, we can also identify potentially what the groundwater level would be in 10, 20, and 30 years. So we're not shooting in the dark. If current static water levels there in March are 100 foot right now, and we're declining 5 foot a year, and we want to reduce that in half in 10 years, we can do the math. We can do the math that says in 30 years, we could be at a groundwater pumping level of 350 foot. So we can plan for domestic use. We can plan for other uses, knowing how deep we have to drill those wells now. But allows the agricultural community to plan and work through, which is very important, not just to the ag community in my community, but it's important to the tax base. It's important to the community. It's important to the schools. We have to have time as a community to work through this.
Hey, Mark, I got a question for you. Have you considered, and you say the reduction, that 3% reduction, is that how are you trying to get that reduction? And have you considered buyouts in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, so we have Ken. First of all, let's start with what the reduction will come from. So I thought, and I think Justin will agree with this, is the reduction is not going to start from the certificated use. It's not going to start from the paper use. It's going to start from our assumption of what is actual usage on the ground. That's going to be done with evapotranspiration modeling to show what is the average use in those sub areas of a critical groundwater designation. It's going to come in, I believe, someplace at 2.35 to 2.4 acre feet. So we're going to have to reduce down from that. Ken, we're talking about multiple tools, efficiencies for conservation, or conservation through efficiencies, converting it over to LISA, converting it over to DRIP. We're also, as in policy option package 13, looking at a CREP program. So right now, it looks like we're going to get support from FSA to do a CREP program if we can find state funding. The state funding has to be a 25% match for that CREP. We look at buying out or sitting idle that ground with a large, possibly monetary figure for a voluntary cancellation of that water rate in 15 years. So we are looking at trying to figure out some monetary compensation for those certificates, because I feel they do have a monetary value and they are a private property or equity right. So therefore, we got to figure out how to compensate for that as we start to need to dry those up. But that's just my opinion.
Well, that's very interesting, Mark. And the reason I asked that question is you guys seem to be very far, quite a ways along in this whole process, and I think some of that could possibly, some same things could be used down here in this Klamath Basin also.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, Ken. One way we're ahead of you, the other way we're behind you. I spent a lot of time talking about water, and when we start those conversations, I'd always say, I'm thankful we're not Klamath Basin. But it now seems like you're going to be prioritizing a critical groundwater designation before we are. So those opportunities for some of those might flip now. And so we might have to work together to figure out how we can support you and some of our thinking on those volunteer agreements and try to get your ag community together, Ken.
Well, Thank you. I agree with that. And I agree with trying to work together and trying to help each other out in all aspects.
Perfect, sir.
Are there any other questions? If not, I guess we go to is there any public comment? If not, I guess that looks like it's it. All right, Justin, you got anything else?
Nothing else for me, thanks.
Does anybody else have anything they want to bring up at this time?
Not here.
If not, I guess we're done. So, oh, I had one question, Justin. I guess we didn't have to have any kind of a motion or anything on that, what you was bringing up before the commission tomorrow?
No. So what I am bringing up in front of the commission, that's just an informational item. So it's just to let them
Okay.
know what we've been up to. So, thanks
Okay.
for asking.
All right, with that, I guess, thanks everybody for joining. Great seeing you all.
All right.
And, Justin, when's our next GWAC, you know?
Sure. I'm gonna have to look it up real quick here. Let's see if do I have it on the agenda? Nope. Sorry, just one moment. So our next. All right, here it is. Next meeting is going to be August 25th. That should be a Tuesday. And then looking even further ahead, last meeting of the year will be November 17th. So I'll get out. We're just now putting together the agenda for the August commission meeting. And once we do that, and I know what's groundwater related, I'll send out a draft agenda for GWAC with those items on it. And we'll plan on getting together end of August.
Sounds good.
All
Well,
right.
thank you, Justin, and thanks everybody for participating. Great seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Yeah,
good night.
likewise. Good seeing everybody. Hope everybody's doing well.
All right. Have a good afternoon, folks.
Bye now.